Okay, welcome Leo Zagami to the Biodigital Convergence Transhumanist Report, or as I like to call it on YouTube, Sheepdogging with Tom Deans. We are here to discuss your new book. Awesome book, man. The Vatican's Top Secret Alien Agenda, Hidden Encounters, Forbidden Rituals, and Jesuit Astronomers in the Age of UFO Disclosure. So, man, like this was an awesome read, right? Like just so much information, and the way that you source the material, it's very difficult for people at the mainstream level of thinking to deny your work. That's what I really like about your books, and we were talking a little bit about this just before the show, but so I encourage people that are kind of sitting on the fence and are quick to dismiss all the conspiracy theories, and they throw out the tinfoil hats. I mean, you got all kinds of people out there, right? But I really would encourage like everyone to take a look at the work that you're doing. There's another book you've wrote that really impacted me really deeply is the one about Jeffrey Epstein, right? And the Sabbatean Frankists. It's worth reading because it gives you an understanding of the different groups. Of course, you talk about also the Jesuits, right? Like you really hone in on almost everyone, and it's in a way to me that I can respect, because I think that in a free society, right, you should be able to do what you're doing, and you do very good work as an
Well, I
investigative
mean,
journalist.
that is also possible because I've been naturalized as an American citizen.
Yeah,
I had a few years which I was in difficulty with writing of these topics because I was in far in enemy territory. Being based in
yeah,
Europe, there is no real freedom of speech and expression back there, and so I had already an accusation. I had already fought an accusation of being a spy, of espionage in Norway, and then I found myself in Italy, which is, of course, very close to the Vatican. Actually, the Vatican
yeah.
is embedded in Italian territory, so you can imagine also how the Italians bow down to whatever the
Mhm.
Vatican says. And of course, I was on their blacklist from the very start. I moved back to Italy in 2008, 2009. But that's okay. I mean, things go as they go. And in 2019, as you know, I moved back here where I am now in the
Yeah.
United States of America. And I finally have the possibility of writing without having the paranoia of somebody
Yeah.
breaking down my door at any point. I mean, it's been very refreshing. The first 2 or 3 years I was here in the United States, I couldn't believe I could be so free of,
Yeah.
protected by the First Amendment, So I had to get used to the fact that I
That you
can
can.
freely write whatever I want, and that
Yeah,
is.
no, and well, and you have, right? Because you've written over a dozen books. I know
Yes.
you got that bestseller, Pope Francis, the Last Pope, too. I've read a lot of your books. I'd like to spend a little bit more time, but to me, like you,
Last year I finished the 12 book series of Confessions of an Illuminati. I finished it with volume 12 dedicated to the Jesuits as being the ones
yeah,
on top of the pyramid. It's a book that you can also read without, reading the previous ones. Often, some of these books in the Confession series are part of maybe a mini series within the series, like for example, volume
yeah,
6.66, volume 7, volume 9, were dedicated to the arrival of Cyber Satan, the rise of Cyber Satan, the AI, robotics. And within that trilogy, I actually started to talk about reverse engineering,
hmm,
about what happened in Magenta in Italy in 1933. I started
yeah,
to hint on certain things, even regarding Jeffrey Epstein, of course, the Sabbatean Frankist in Volume
hmm,
7, I hinted on that. And also in previous books, like Volume 4, I discussed the relation between the Sabbatean Frankists and the Jesuits. But what I'm doing here is, in fact, after the end of the Confessions of an Illuminati series, discussing and analyzing further certain topics which I think deserve further attention. And this one was on my list for a long time. So I
yeah,
want to really um, deal with it when I felt myself also mature enough and ready enough to bring out certain truths also about my past experiences.
Yeah, well, and you certainly have done that. I mean, to be honest, right? Like I haven't even have heard of the magenta. I think it was in 1933, until I came across your work or have read your book. Of course, everyone's heard of Roswell in 47, and the fact too that you talk about how this reverse engineering. Now, like in my mind, like I don't have a really hard time with interdimensional beings, extraterrestrial beings, or like, but I'm not a very binary person too, and they may overlap as well, right? Because I consider us really as a like at least a common folk like myself, like that we tend to solidify in our programming as we get a little bit older, and I think that that is actually part of the plan when really it's just about acknowledging how little we actually know. And I find reading some of the books that you present really puts light on some of the societies and some of the groups that are at work behind the scenes, right? And you try to do this with documentation, with proof, right? Because people are like, well, show me the proof, right? Show me the
Yeah, yeah, that
documentation.
is, the kind of criticism which,
Yeah.
that I think most people that touch on this topic get. So that was really important for me to collaborate with the Centro Ufologico Nazionale in Italy, with Kuhn, to have access to certain documents which I could then relay inside this essay. And it makes definitely a difference because, we are trying here to verify certain truths thanks to the testimony of credible
Yeah.
academics as well as researchers. So I think that the actual mission has been accomplished. Not all of the people out there will be happy with what I wrote
No.
because, of course, I'm exposing
Yeah.
who is really controlling this whole UFO disclosure. And I think that they will have a
Well,
hard time admitting that.
yeah. Well, also you're highlighting what some of the officials are speaking out publicly, right? Because I mean, you're like one of the you're watching them pretty closely, right? Like what they're willing to say over what they're, some people are kind of backpedaling a little bit too. Like I know you've highlighted a few things that have been said in the US. I mean, in Canada, of course, everything is basically suppressed, and you get the odd one speaking out, but everything kind of gets censored and rolled over, and it's all sunshine and rainbows up here, right? There's all kinds of things. I mean, it's. But let's talk a little bit. Can you elaborate a little bit? Let's start with just the magenta versus Roswell. Just comment a little bit on that because I know AI and all this reverse engineering, like in my view, there's all kinds of things going on underground, right? I mean, you hear the odd whistleblower talk about the dumb bases, right? Like, I'm sure you've heard of that too, coming out, right? Where like I would specifically reference the Greys per se. They seem to be like entities. I call them esoteric entities because I'm not quite sure. Of course, there's the four, right? The insectoids, the Pleiadians or Nordics, whatever you want to call them, and the reptilians. These are like the big ones that people are talking about. I mean, there could be, like you've mentioned before, there could be thousands, there could be tens of thousands, who knows? But the question, of course, one of the problems I have is the oversimplification of what these, I'm going to call them esoteric entities, whatever aliens are. Of course, in the evangelical world, one of the difficulties I have is that everything is generalized as demonic. Which, whatever, you can do that, but I don't think that's very smart. I think that's kind of foolish, to just categorize it. Okay, so everything is just demonic, right? That we can't
I think
explain
that here
within.
we find ourselves in front of, an oversimplification on one side or the other, and
Yeah.
also an attempt by the Vatican to simply say, oh, we should embrace them because they are extraterrestrial brothers, without
Yeah.
thinking for even a moment that, it could be fallen angels, but it could also be races that have maybe a more demonic and evil inclination rather than a
Yeah.
benevolent angelic one. I
Sure.
mean, the good and evil concept reflected in the universe could be reflected in different ways. Now, you ask me
Yeah.
about Magenta is the turning point for, I think, not only the Vatican, but for the beginning of that reverse engineering that has manifested fully after after Roswell and after other accidents that occurred. Even before Roswell, there was the Trinity accident, which is also very relevant and important one before that, and there was another one even before. I mean, there is a bunch of events that
Sure.
happened, even in Italy. I didn't want to really relay that on my book because it was not be pertinent with the whole subject I was discussing. And as you know, it's already 450 pages, so I didn't want to make it a
Yeah, it's yeah,
so, but even in Italy, if we start studying the phenomenon, we can see that there was a bunch of sightings even in the 1920s, and then they led, it was almost like a build-up to then the 1933 event, which eventually generated a UFO that was then retrieved, brought to a place called Monte Sorrate after it was retrieved between Vergiate and Magenta, and then brought initially in Vergiate and then moved
mhm,
to, as I explain in the book. And of course, then it led immediately to the attention of the fascists who wanted to reverse engineering the
of
whole
course.
thing. But there had been a series of events that had been taking place even earlier than that. They, of course, didn't lead to a UFO crash, but there was events that were testimonied, that we have testimony of, for example, in Sardinia. Near Cagliari in 1931. We have also other events in Turin in 1930-31. We have prior to that events that happen also in other areas in Italy. In 1929, we have near Lucca, which is in Tuscany, we have various testimonies about also a UFO sighting. So we have, let's say, from the early 1920s onwards, a build-up, and in fact, the Centro Ufologico Nazionale, the CUN, had known about this, of course, the CUN, for those who don't know it, is an institution that was established 60 years ago in Italy, and since then it has been, working at times side to side with institutions to try to retrieve most of the testimonies of events that have taken place that are unexplained, that are connected to what we now call UAP, we used to call UFO.
Yeah.
I still tend to call UFO anyway. But there was definitely not only that the crash of a UFO, or some say this UFO landed and simply stayed there and then it was retrieved, but we don't really know. What we know is that definitely the UFO was then brought away to Montesorate for reverse engineering, and that from 1933 to all the way to 1940, so within the period of time which maybe people don't know, but fascism ruled Italy for 20 years, not one year. So Italy was under the control of a secret service called Obra, which was a rather hardcore intelligence asset in the hands of a dictator who was very meticulous in silencing also any voice of dissent, but also when it came down to this UFO crash, if you want to call it like that, because that's what we call it, the Magenta UFO crash, even if it happened actually between Magenta and Vergiate, they
Okay.
tend to call it the Magenta crash because it was. But we can say that the moment it was retrieved, it was already in the context of a reverse engineering situation where Germany and Italy, allied together with Japan, wanted to reverse engineer anything that was retrieved from the Soviet Union, England, or the United States. So initially, they didn't really know what to do with it because the technology that was probably shown in this UFO was far too advanced to do
Yeah.
anything about it. But then, of course, we have the intervention of one of the most eminent Italian scientists who became the director of this cabinet, RS-33 cabinet, who was Guglielmo Marconi. Guglielmo Marconi became the guy in charge of the whole thing. But he was not only a scientist, he was also an ardent and devout Catholic. So when the Pope eventually will ask him to not give any reverse engineer technology to Mussolini and then to Hitler,
Mhm.
then there was, of course, Marconi accepted the whole thing and didn't blink an eye, because the Pope for him was more important than the head of the Italian government at the time. Marconi died, of course, in 1937. So by the time he had, conducted all the necessary studies um, on this spaceship, let's say,
Yeah.
And then it was passed on to his successors, but eventually they had the same orders. The orders were not to give this technology for it will have probably changed the course of the war. Imagine, I mean, he was considered the father of telecommunications. He had invented radio. He had been
Mhm.
somebody who had been focused on that side of communication and not really involved in the military build up or the build up of new weapons. I don't think that he was particularly enthused by that. So in the end the right choice was made, and I think that it influenced the course of the war. So when
Of course.
the 1941 was the moment in which Anerbe, and the Anerbe, as you know, was studying all these, various relics, and apparently the Anerbe was for Adolf Hitler and for Himmler in particular, who directed the whole thing, a way to connect with the secrets that could have changed the course of the war. I mean, we have seen it even with
Mhm.
Steven Spielberg bringing it up within the
Oh, yeah.
Indiana Jones saga. So here we have, So I think
Yeah.
that when the interesting thing about the Hanerbe was that it was founded in 1935, and so 2 years after they recovered this UFO. So it was a new creation, it was something new. So when they started to get interested in it, that might have been really the moment that influenced the decision of Marconi, because he didn't trust Himmler, he didn't trust probably what the Germans would have done with this reverse engineering. I mean, think about it. In 1942, the year after
Mhm.
they started to interest themselves, especially it is said that they interested themselves in this UFO. They wanted to bring this UFO to Germany. The ANERB started sponsoring pseudo-scientific medical experiments in the concentration camps, which were monstrosities by today's standards.
Mhm.
And so these they didn't have any, ethics or morals.
No.
But we can say though that the layout of that reverse engineering that was somehow put together in the period of time in which the Germans work with the fascists, then was inherited by the OSS and the CIA, and then of course it was passed on to the American institutions that are now
Mhm.
today involved with what is known as the legacy program. So the actual Department of Energy, which is connected to what used to be the Manhattan Project, and then we have the Air Force Intelligence, we have the CIA, and the defense contractors now are being blamed as being the ones who are covering up everything. But I think that
Yeah.
that is just a convenient way for the institutions to blame somebody else. I don't think that the private institution have less responsibilities than the public ones in this case.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean it for me it's everyone's trying to control the narrative, like the different groups, right, for different reasons. And For me, it's always about to like, of course, with the way, you know, human beings tend to be, right? They're always looking for the military advantage. So of course, if we have a craft like this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the
Mm.
Magenta case, didn't they recover a couple of what I'm going to call the quote unquote Nordic type bodies that were there? Was
Yeah,
it Bel?
that is what is being said. Now we
Okay.
know that
Okay.
in the past these Nordic type bodies were called Venusians
Okay.
in the
Yeah,
UFO.
there's different words, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
different words. But I mean, yes, the Nordics seem to have been the ones that were recovered. Now, we know that in UFO lore, there is those who say the Nordics are benevolent beings, others who says they're actually the fallen angels.
Yeah. I've
And,
heard
and
that
so
too.
there is a lot being said. However, I think that regardless of the biologics that were recovered, that at the time would have been a little bit difficult to
Yeah.
maintain also because of the war, what was going on, because also of the technological facilities that will make it very difficult
Yeah.
to keep those beings. I think that that will have been a little bit difficult. However, the most important element here is what arrived manifested after all this. It
Okay.
manifested the interest of the Vatican on a topic which no other religion had, of course, the same kind of direct knowledge.
Hmm.
The Vatican was then involved with sending their own representative to Roswell when we had the UFO crash in Roswell, which I
Hmm.
explain in my book, as you know,
Yeah.
which, by the way, it's something that was discussed even in the Vatican this year by Vladimiro Bibolotti, who is one of the representatives of Kuhn, who was actually delivering a speech this year, and who claims that Corrado Balducci had received this direct knowledge of the events and involvement of the Vatican directly from McIntyre, who is himself an important figure within, was an important figure within the Vatican, because James Francis Cardinal McIntyre apparently he was created a cardinal in 1953. But before that, he had become Archbishop of Los Angeles from 1948. And before that, he had been a very important representative of the Catholic Church. So it's obvious that when he was from New York, from Manhattan, his father was a native from New York City, and he was actually somebody who started working when he was only 16 as a New York Stock Exchange runner boy
Oh,
kind
well.
of thing. So he
Yeah.
then studied in Queens, the Cathedral College there, and he was ordained to priesthood in 1921. But his most important development in his personal career happened when he was promoted to chancellor in 1934 and named Privy Chamberlain to Pope Pius XI from December 27, 1943. Actually, Pope Pius, I think the 12th at that
Hmm.
point, it would have been. But that means that he wasn't just a um simple prelate, let's say, no, simple. He was somebody who was considered, he was a Monsignor from 1936. Monsignor is a form of address for those who are not Catholics. It's basically, it's a little bit more than a normal priest, a don or a father. Monsignor is
Okay.
like, so you become a Monsignor or Monsignore, as they say in Italian. Usually the abbreviation stands as MSGR, and it's also a form that is used to address bishops, because usually the Monsignori usually always become bishops after anyway.
Okay.
Not all of them, but the title is an appointment towards a form of a career priest, let's say, not an
Okay.
organ. Okay, so this career figure apparently became very much involved with the whole following the whole thing. And by following the whole thing, he was then related to the Vatican, and the Vatican then, when they asserted that the Americans had not only retrieved the UFO through the back channeling of Pope Pius XII, as confirmed, by the way, in 2023, also by David Grush. David Grush
Mhm.
is not only a former military intelligence, he's also a Catholic, and he works as an agent of the Jesuits, because all these figures, as you know, that I describe in this book, are all very much controlled by the Vatican. The Vatican controls them through their various representatives. And the most eminent representatives in this sector, are, of course, the Jesuits. Like, for example, at the moment, the director of the Specula Vaticana is Father Di Sosa, this Indian guy. In fact, he was actually guested recently also in News Nation. News Nation is a gatekeeper kind of channel with Ross Coulthard, with all the, everything that goes on with their soft disclosure. It's
Yeah.
filtered from News Nation. It's almost like they have made out of News Nation this official or unofficial, let's say, channel for the disclosure. So when you have also things that are happening on Capitol Hill regarding disclosure, the event that was recently held with the Disclosure Foundation, the event prior to that when they were standing on the stairs of the Capitol with David Grush talking, it always broadcast on News Nation. And it's not a coincidence, because apparently News Nation is very much linked to the Jesuits, as they want this whole topic to be filtered in a way that it pleases them. They are the ones who decide how the narrative is conducted. Now,
Yeah.
there was a book that came out in 2005, which I cite in my book, and you can find actually the link in my book for it, because I'm very detailed with all the links at the end,
Hmm.
like
Yeah. It's
we were
good.
discussing. Uh, this book was actually, when it first came out in 2005, was not really a book that the Jesuits wanted in circulation. So they took out of circulation this book. It was written by Guy Consolmagno, who then later became the director of the Speculum until last year. He's now the director um, of the Foundation, which is another important institution connected to the Vatican Observatory. The book in particular was called Intelligent Life in the Universe, Catholic Belief in the Search of Extraterrestrial Intelligent Life. Why was it removed from circulation? Well, one of the main reasons was that it kind of portrayed the aliens almost as the same saviors of mankind. But there was also an important admission that the author calls the hunch. He says, I have a hunch, I can't prove it, I can't be sure I'm right. He creates all this false narrative to present this, and then he says, I could well be wrong, but still I have a hunch that sooner or later the human race will discover that here are other intelligent creatures out there in the universe. And he says in that book, part of my reason for that hunch is a scientific one, because there are already hundreds of nearby stars that we know have planets and blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
Now, we know that in reality, it's not a deduction that brings him to write that, because Guy Consolmagno was, his mentor was Father Coyne. Father Coyne, who was critical in establishing the Mount Graham Observatory for the Jesuits in
Mhm.
Arizona. Father Coyne, who had worked at SETI for a long time, who was very close to people like Carl Sagan, who was close to people like Danny Sheehan, who today are the lawyer of Luis Elizondo, of Stephen Greer, who are behind the scenes kind of piloting
Yeah.
this disclosure. So I think that this book is definitely not going to make me any friends, because I'm exposing all this, and I'm exposing also the way that the Vatican has been kind of very ambiguous about all this. It's like they want to hide their real intention, but then they admit that their vision of the universe is that we are not alone and that they will embrace anything that comes out of a spaceship, basically. That is like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's almost like you see in their Vatican disclosure narrative one constant. They don't recognize demons, they don't discuss demons, or if they discuss them, they discuss them like a nonsense that has nothing to do with an extraterrestrial or
Yeah.
interdimensional or extra-dimensional reality. It's like that is what characterizes, I think, more their appreciation that God is the creator of the universe. Of course, we
Hmm.
can understand that. It's logic. The universe contains billions and billions of galaxies and stars. It makes us realize that God, of course, is infinite. We can then at that point speculate if Christ's salvation can apply to other beings. But the thing is that they want to force that
Yeah.
salvation, and they want to sell us the fact that the salvation is for the whole universe, and they did that by adapting their theology in a way that other Christian denominations have not. And
Oh,
even within Catholicism itself, things have changed very much, leading also to a breakup with their more traditional faction that has not never been pleased with the decisions of Vatican II. So the fact that
mhm.
actually this book I bring out as a major inspiration for Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council, the possibility that the Pope had an encounter of the third kind in July 1961, and
Yeah.
before that, he actually was absorbed into a channeling within a lodge of Freemasonry because he was a Freemason, Roncalli, Pope John the 23rd. And before becoming Pope, he was initiated in France and then he moved to Istanbul. And in Istanbul, during the 18th degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite workings, apparently he had this channeling. Some say that he was actually being initiated, inducted into a secretive Rosicrucian group operating within Freemasonry. I don't know. But the worshipper master at the time immediately ordered the secretary of the lodge to transcribe everything that he was relating. And then that material and his testimony eventually will make it to another Freemason called Pierre Carpi. Now, Pierre Carpi is a very interesting guy because he was a member of the P2 Lodge. Here I show him next to another
Stick.
very good friend of mine, Gaetano Saia, who is a member, used to be a member of P2, but also of NATO Gladio Stay Behind Operation. What people don't know about Pierre Carpi is that he made movies. He made actually a movie even on Cagliostro, which you can find online. It's an excellent movie about Count Cagliostro. And you can also find books that are rather interesting written by Pierre Carpi. He's no longer with us, but in his testimony, when he brought out the prophecies, he called them of John the 23rd, he said that they were given to him by a senior figure within Freemasonry, and it happened during a meeting that happened in the castle of San Leo. Now, the castle of San Leo is the place where Count Cagliostro was eventually located after he was arrested by the Inquisition. And Count Cagliostro was also a guy who was very inspirational within Freemasonry. He inspired the rites of Memphis and Mizraim. He created his own Egyptian rite, allegedly inspired by an alien encounter with Enoch and Elijah, which he talked about. So there is definitely a lot of interesting material in my new book that people in the English speaking world have never heard of because
No.
when
Yeah.
Carpi published the book, it was only published in Italian and French.
Yeah.
And so there was never the possibility for the English speaking audience to know what John the 23rd had experienced and this encounter that led to him also prophesizing what will happen in the age of disclosure, because that's another important element that a lot of people don't know about, is that John the 23rd, in this Pierre Carpi alleged prophecies that Pierre
Mhm.
Carpi reported, said that there will be a big change in society with disclosure, and that all this will happen around the year 2030. So it is
Yeah,
like
that's
very interesting also that during the pandemic, the Italian newspapers related also some of the elements within the prophecies, the profezie, what they used to call them in Italian, which is the profezie di Papa Giovanni, because it actually described also a pandemic before that,
oh yeah, yeah,
which I
yeah,
talk about, as you know, in my book. So there is some interesting elements there, and I'm actually very thankful to that part of Freemason, because here, we have an ongoing criticism towards the Masons and and the Illuminati, and I agree, the Illuminati are no good, and this book demonstrates once again that the
yeah.
Illuminati are behind the scenes. But I'm not talking about hypothetical Illuminati. I'm talking about real Illuminati. I mean, I show
Mhm.
the evidence here. Are working with the
Yeah,
Secretary of State of
they're
the
yeah, they're
Vatican.
real.
But the Freemasons, they are not to be generalized, because, for example, Roberto Pinotti gave me a hand and helped me out with this book. And
Hmm.
he is very close to all these gatekeepers and their organizations like the Soul Foundation. I mean, for him, it's not going to be easy, because he's going to receive an amount of criticism from within the system for having supported me. But he wasn't the only Mason who gave me information and helped me out. We had Gianmario Ferramonti, who became the guy who was bringing alien artifacts between Zaccaria Sitchin and Corrado Balducci. I had the opportunity to collaborate with many Masons who gave me the opportunity then to relay this information to the outside world. So we can't say that there is like initial. You see, when I started my Confessions of an Illuminati 20 years ago online, before they became a book series, years after I started publishing in Japan, then in Italy, and finally in 2015, I started to publish my books in America after a visit here to the United States, where I had to actually in 2014, we started to, I think, translate and publish the first book, which was Pope Francis, the Last Pope, which became, as you said, a bestseller.
Hmm.
Then, of course, the Confession series, which started with Brad Olsen's CCCC Publishing, the first three books, and then we had Invisible Master. Invisible Master was the first book on this specific topic that I touched on, and outside of the Confession series. I mean, I will highly and strongly suggest people who have purchased my
Yeah.
latest book, The Vatican Top Secret and the Agenda, to also purchase Invisible Master, The Puppeteer's Hidden Power, because it will definitely give them a complete vision of how things are. It came out, the first edition, in early 2019.
Hmm.
I completed writing this book for the English version in 2018, but it is a book that explains how, for thousands of years, the ancient mystery schools, even the shamans of old, had been in contact with these beings, the nature of these
Hmm.
beings, interdimensional, extra-dimensional, also extraterrestrial, but that doesn't preclude, there's always a tendency to exclude one and put the other, while instead then we see that even
Hmm.
Carl Sagan admitting the possibility of both, because an
Well,
advanced extraterrestrial race will have interdimensional capabilities, of course. Um, so I think that, when we go into the Illuminati, into the secret societies, and we see their fixation with this in search of some kind of Stargate, no? And then, of course, we see what happened later on with the remote viewers in America with Hal Puthoff, Rasotag, and then we had also in Russia General Savin, which I talk about, to try to then collaborate also with the Jesuits. I mean, there is definitely a reality which is completely unknown to most people, even within the
Yeah.
UFO world, which when I came here and I arrived in California, in Palm Springs, in end of May 2019, the synchronicity of events made it possible for me to attend immediately what is Contact in the Desert, which is the biggest UFO event here in the United States of America. But I immediately noticed when I arrived to this event that I wasn't particularly welcome. And I thought it was a little bit strange. I was welcomed by people who were not formally working for the organization. They were like embracing me. Oh, Leo Zagami, you're here, blah, blah, blah. But then I thought these people from the event were like kind of weird because, I've been on the scene for many decades and I have
Yeah.
done what and they were even having that year as a special guest, the late David Wilcock, who, by the way, had some prior, encounter with me, which I helped him out. And then suddenly he transformed himself in a sort of enemy, which I didn't understand why, because him and Benjamin Fulford, this Canadian guy, by the way, who lives in
Oh, yeah.
Japan, who seems to be the root of a lot of my problems, including the disappearance later on of of those channel documents
Yeah.
which I received after the download that followed my first and only encounter of the fair kind in Rome, in Campo di Fiori, which I also talk about, as you know, in this book. So
Hmm.
I noticed that these events had some kind of government control, but there was something more. I have been talking for decades about the Jesuits, about the way they control factions of Freemasonry, factions of, the Illuminati, this, that, and all the other. And I wanted to investigate if there was the same kind of control upon the UFO phenomenon, because yes, I knew that the Vatican had the Jesuit astronomers in charge and that they were working for many decades also after their own the start of their exopolitical thinking in the 1950s. Their alleged encounter with the Pope in 1961. I knew about these things, but I wanted to know the connections with the contemporary UFO disclosure narrative and their advocates. And it took me 7 years since I arrived here in the United States to finally get them all on paper and
Yeah.
present them to the outside world, and to do it also in a moment of time that coincided with one of the biggest gatekeepers, Steven
Yeah.
Spielberg, doing his movie Disclosure Day.
Yeah. I mean, you've touched on almost, a lot of different things there. And, because first and foremost, like my understanding of the Jesuits, it's a society of Jesus, right? And to me, they are like, in my view, the intelligence agency for the Vatican. And of course, you highlight the fact too, like these alleged encounters of the third kind, right? That even the popes, there's several popes, I think you mentioned, that experience these things in Castel Gandolfo, right? If I'm correct me if
Well, I
I'm
mean,
wrong.
that is the place where actually there was an encounter of the third kind that was witnessed also by the secretary of the Pope at the time, Capovilla. We are talking about John the 23rd. But 10 years prior to that, there had been also an encounter of the second kind in the gardens of the Vatican, within
Yeah.
actually Vatican walls, the Leonine walls, as they're called. And then we had before that, a long time ago, other encounters, even during a conclave, as I describe in my book. And there were a bunch of encounters that were also, of course, judged with the capabilities of the time, intellectual and
Yeah.
scientific.
Yeah.
So,
Of course.
what
Yeah.
changes is that now, since the 1930s, gradually we are engaging in a technological situation where it's reverse engineering becomes actually a relevant factor. Now, I know that there is those who say, this reverse engineering has not fully produced the results because we cannot fully grasp this technology and all that. But in reality, is that most of this technology is simply left secret, as even Tesla himself
Yeah,
downloaded
I
this
agree.
technology, and
Yeah.
Tesla himself was fought and ended up then at the end, when he
Yeah.
died, all his documents were seized
That's
and
right.
everything was deemed as a secret that will challenge the established norms when you have, of course, us relating on
It's all the money.
technology, which makes us of course, dependent on fossil fuels and all the
Yeah.
rest. We are, of course, depending on the Rockefellers of the situation. We are talking about Standard Oil. We're talking about,
Yeah.
just to know, to
That's
cite
right. I
one.
mean, but that's right. That's exactly right. I mean, it like the way I look at it is basically, yeah, I mean the super rich are basically running the show, and I mean whoever can gain control of the technology, they're gonna exhaust the resources, whatever for the systems that are in place, and then gradually, this is the thing. I look at basically most of us as kind of, they look at us like cattle. And okay, we have a certain element of freedom in the United States and in Western countries, but yeah, like I actually don't believe that this is what our world was truly intended to be originally, but it's what we've created, by the power of our own free will and the battles that we fight, and whether people are willing to accept things for what they are, especially in a place like this is why education and what you're doing is very important, because to me you're the knowledge, at least for those that will respond, and if you do it in an academic way, at least it's the tip of the iceberg, and it makes you ask a whole other series of questions. And depending on what your skill set is, then you become activated to counter, I would say, like you were talking about, how in the universe there's an expression of, I would say, the dark forces of evil and of good. And that can manifest itself, I believe, in different entities and the way you conduct your business, like all throughout the complexity of the universe, all the way down to the simplest things. But that's the way I understand it. And yeah, like as I said before, even you mentioned the apostolic library and the Vatican Apostolic Library and the Vatican
There is the
Apostolic
Vatican Apostolic
Archive.
Library, and then there is the Vatican Apostolic
Yes,
Archive, which used to be the secret archive. And these are filled
yes,
with knowledge which is commonly not accessible to most people, even within the academic world. I was
yeah,
lucky enough, thanks to my collaboration with the Kuhn, to also cite the work of Alfredo Lissoni, who is a professor of religion who has, in the late 90s, early 2000s, had access somehow to these archives and was able to maybe
yeah,
study some of the UFO phenomena without, of course, stating to
yeah.
the Vatican he
I
was
get it.
studying the UFO phenomena, because that is an important element of our story here. There has
Yep.
been even recently a professor, Professor Pasulka, Diana Walsh Pasulka, who is also a gatekeeper, who was able to accede in more recent times the archives, who even herself had to admit, probably directed by her Vatican handlers, especially the ones in Castel Gandolfo, which she admits, by the way, in American Cosmic, that she met with Guy Consolmagno, who she says is a very good guy. She went up there after the Vatican archives. The Vatican archives are a depository of these secrets, and she said she acceded them officially with the excuse of studying for the cause of beatification and sanctification of a couple of Catholic figures. But prior to that, my friend Alfredo Lissoni had to instead say that he was studying for Christian legends, and these
Yeah.
Christian legends could compromise, could include the truths that we are discussing without compromising, of course, the position of the Vatican that likes to stay
Yeah.
distant And even recently, when the David Grush came out in 2023 with the fact that Pope Pius XII had helped back channeling the UFO to the Allied forces, the OSS that then became the CIA, they went to the Vatican, the usual News Nation crew, and they said, no, the Vatican is saying, and other journalists did the same, and they couldn't find any confirmation. But of course, you can't find any
Yeah,
confirmation.
like
The Vatican will never give you such
why
confirmation. It
would
would be
they?
rather
Yeah.
naive to think
Yeah.
the contrary. The Vatican is actually, I mean, we have a filmmaker called Sam Sorich. I talk about him in my book, as you know. He's uh, a teacher at John Paul the Great Catholic University, and is currently investigating for a documentary that should come out at the end of this year called The Edge of Belief. Now, he is trying to find evidence for the Magenta UFO crash, and there is evidence in in the various archives and stuff. So there is evidence. But if he thinks that he can find evidence within the Vatican, the guy is eluding himself, because the Vatican will not give that kind of
Yeah,
information.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, like exactly like you said, like this stuff has already been dealt with like I mean, what you can find in the public domain is one thing, but that's intentional to me. Like
I mean, we have to thank for the information, the more accurate information regarding the Magenta UFO crash, the Mussolini UFO, as they call it. We
Mhm.
have to thank the grandson of Benito Mussolini, who actually had his father killed by his father-in-law. I'm talking about the
Yeah, you
son of
mentioned.
Galeazzo Ciano. I mean, we're talking about the grandson of Benito Mussolini, who apparently in the late 90s started to send out all this information and documents to various people, and we are talking about various files. And
Hmm.
then these three people in the picture are very important. The one on the left here is Roberto Pinotti. The one on the center is one of the biggest forensic analysts in Italy. He's no longer alive, but he was the one who actually analyzed the documents. And next to him is Alfredo Lissoni, the guy I just cited, who also was able to go into the Vatican archives. And so these people, they actually, once they received these documents, they didn't simply, accept them as truth. They then
Yeah.
had a forensic analyst who
Yeah.
then confirmed they were true documents. And they are not only documents that relate to 1933, but they relate to all the UFO sightings that then followed the 1933 UFO crash. It was almost like other UFOs were searching for their missing UFO kind of thing. So they started testing the skies of Italy in a way that it became impossible for them to distance the actual government had to discuss the phenomena. And in fact, there is actually drawings that were made within the government with the
Yeah.
official
Yeah.
government paper of these UFOs and so on.
Hmm. I
So I
mean,
think that
yeah.
is important that people realize that the work that I put in here is really based on fact, not on speculation. And when
Yeah.
I have no certainty about, for example, this, which is the most
Yeah. That's
controversial,
pretty good. Yeah, I
this,
like that.
but I say
Yeah.
it's an alleged, it's an alleged photo of an, it's a photo of an alleged worker who found this alleged skull, alien skull within the Vatican archive. I don't confirm it 100% because I don't have the possibility of confirming it 100%.
Yeah,
But I
I get.
can at least cite the articles of
Yeah.
Barbato that talk about it or and
Yeah.
on the Italian press. Now, regarding the documents of Fabrizio, that, by the way, was the third count of Cartellasso, was an aristocrat, there was actually the rest of his family confirmed after that these documents were genuine. And there was
Mhm.
also members of the Marconi family that confirmed that Marconi was involved in this UFO cabinet, in this reverse engineering group built around this UFO that was recovered. So, I mean, we're not talking about small people. We're talking about the grandson of Benito Mussolini, the relatives of Marconi. I mean, it's a rather incredible thing.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's very thorough. Like you touch on so much. Like I find that with your works. Really, it's you got to study it. I mean, you would read through once. To me, it's something you should read through probably 10 times if you really want to,
Yeah, yeah,
if
yeah.
you're really interested. Yeah, like you can't just because it's or take notes, take notes and highlight the areas that you want to investigate further. I mean, like it's incredible to me, but clearly, I think I can state from even just reading your book, there's all kinds of things going on that
Well, I mean,
most of
one
us,
thing that, for example, people don't know was that when Guglielmo Marconi, who was, like we said, the inventor of the radio, started to, build up his communication system in
yeah,
the early 1900s, he actually received signals from space
hmm,
that and there is actually an article that I might send you a clip
sure,
from 1909 that states that Marconi might receive messages from planet Mars, and this was an article that came out in April 1909. So I mean,
hmm,
it was kind of like a long time before things, and then we have and it was actually even the Washington Times in January 28 1920 signaled they knew about it because they wrote an article entitled "Mars may be signaling us on our radio, scientists here agree with Marconi." So this was the kind of pre-SETI world. Then, as you know, we have the establishment of SETI.
yeah.
And that is also in itself a subject which is of interest because then the Jesuits become part of it. So, uh,
Well, like, yeah, and also too, just highlighting too, one thing that I thought was good that you did really well was, yeah, the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope in Mount Graham, Arizona. But there's also that large binocular telescope with Lucy 1 and Lucy 2, those attachments, right, to that particular telescope. And also the connection to the Jesuits and also how the headquarters, like I'm just kind of putting some of the things together that I got out of my first read at Castel Gandolfo, right? Like is where
Castel Gandolfo, yes.
yeah, like it's interesting, yeah, like it fascinates me. This stuff, like man, like I find this stuff really fascinating, right? And if I had the resources, I mean, I would spend my time doing like field investigations and just even some of the things that you're doing. I think it's an amazing world to study, right? And the technologies, like even with your close encounter of the third kind, like if we want to touch on that, because what I found interesting was the mention of a blue orb and it's almost like a telepathic transmission. And to
Yeah.
me, I relate that to somewhat of a remote viewing telecommunication system, an advanced system, right? Where like you
I mean,
mentioned,
absolutely. In fact,
yeah,
the interesting thing about this experience with the blue orb, which of course I include as a side note at the end of the book, because I don't
yeah,
want, like I said in other interviews, I don't want it to distract from the essay in itself. I
yeah,
find that there is a lot of people that give themselves too much importance to certain things, and then they tend
that's
to
fair.
become almost like the ego gets built by this. Oh, I've been abducted, or I've been contacted.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
I didn't want to give that. I actually never really
I don't get
meant,
that impression,
you
but
know.
yeah.
No, but if you think about it, my first intention was to describe the esoteric side, which I did
Hmm.
in volume three of my confessions. There is where I actually said, okay, I'm going to describe the esoteric side of this experience. I think that that is enough here. I don't want to go into more details because I didn't think I was ready for giving all the details. This
Yeah.
time, I give the rest of the story. I simply say previously it was classified by the Italian SISMI, the military
Yeah.
intelligence. It happened in 1993. I was
That
only
was a long time
23
ago.
years. I was only 23 years of age, but I was actually at the
Hmm.
time an occultist who was practicing what is known as the magic of Abramelin the Mage.
Hmm.
And it changed completely my own perspective of reality, but also the whole perspective of what the occult was. Because up until then, the occult was what most people think about. The occult is something
Yeah, yeah.
While instead, with that contact, with that experience, I, at that point, had the confirmation that we are talking about science here. We are talking about science. It's no longer some kind of attempt to invoke or evoke something, but it is
Hmm.
about bringing the boundaries of science further. And in that
Yeah.
capacity, I went on and lived that experience, which, as you know, brought me then some very interesting information. And then the way that things happened and manifested in the months following that, where it was pretty indicative that something important had happened. And in fact, it was maybe a year after that that I ended up then having to leave Italy altogether and
Hmm.
go to London and change completely my life. But also going to London, I became involved then directly with the Ordo Templi Orientis, with the Rosicrucians, with the Freemasons there, and it kind of like while I was moving through all these degree systems, I felt
Yeah.
that the knowledge that was bestowed upon me during that encounter and the following days that see the channeling, the downloading, as they call it these days, in the
Yeah.
case of contactism, it gave me that opportunity to download that information that I would then use to climb the ladder of certain organizations.
Yeah. I got it. Yeah, because I mean, you mentioned it struck me when you mentioned like about the ancient Egyptian metaphysical practices, right? And when you mentioned like spherical trigonometry, like precise angular geometry and complex
Yes.
astrological information, mathematical formulas. Like okay, like this doesn't just like the way I understand things, there's so much more about quote unquote science that we human beings do not understand. So it appears as quote unquote magic or like it's dismissed by like mainstream because there's no like I mean some people do understand it, okay, mind you. But and of course, like when you mention these things, like it made me think of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and I do a lot of like esoteric reading, like myself.
It's
And
actually interesting that you say that because at the
yeah,
time when I started that when that experience took place, I
yeah,
was actually also studying the Book of Thoth of Aleister Crowley, which itself is built upon that hermetic, let's say,
hmm,
Gnostic legacy, and then. Let's not forget, I didn't know that at the time, but
yeah,
soon after I got initiated into the AA, which apparently has also a link with Sirius. So it kind of became, you see, the Book of Abramelin is to this day a grimoire that very few people do, mainly because it's a 6 months to 18 months spiritual ritual, and nobody has that kind of time available.
yeah,
I was really understanding at that young age that I had to take a break from everything. I had, life had started very early for me. Also, regarding my personal professional success, I was, only 20 when suddenly my music, my DJing have brought me to become one of the, Italians, founders of the rave movement all over Europe. I was,
that was
people
cool.
were inviting me to
Yeah,
Paris, to Swiss, to England, and there was, I was in contact and working with people like I even produce records with people like Prodigy or others. So I mean, for their own record label, this is the kind of reality that a musician, a DJ, a record producer will not normally encounter. But because of my family
hmm,
background, because I had always been curious in parallel, my music, my passion for music went in parallel with my passion for the esoteric from a very
yeah,
young age. I was facilitated, of course, from having a family library with all the books of the world on this subject. But it was also because I was personally obsessed with certain subjects that my father would often bring up. He had been, of course, himself researching out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, paranormal. He had, like I explained in volume 11 of my Confessions, he had briefly worked for MK Ultra in France at the Sorbonne during a series of experiments. So it was, the Book of Abraham Melling and the structure. I mean, the text is divided into 3 or 4 books. And depending, on the original German or the translated French version. Of course, it was the MacGregor Matters version that we still find in France, which was translated and made the first English version that then reached Aleister Crowley, because MacGregor Matters was the mentor of Aleister Crowley in the Golden Dawn. So I thought that this book would be highly transformative, because the intention of Aleister Crowley, which I talk about in Visible Master, was to bypass the terrestrial institutions and to go directly to those secret chiefs, those invisible masters who were non-human intelligence, as it happened after.
Yeah.
No, so my intention was, I mean, you have to have, for the magic of Abraham Melin, extreme discipline. You have to be like a monk. You have to fast, you have to pray, you have to isolate yourself, and you have to then use what are these magical word squares. And the fact that they were popularized in the late 19th century by the occultist MacGregor Matters was for me a very important element, as well as the cover of the first edition of the Book of Abraham Melling, which seemed almost similar to Padre Pio, which is also a figure which later became a saint of the Catholic Church, which I said I had some kind of I felt I had a spiritual link with. And so that experience, that contact, it was not like I was searching for extraterrestrial contact or any UFO contact. I wasn't a ufologist. I was an occultist. I was doing something completely different. That's why I did this preface to what you are saying, because I wanted to explain to people. I wasn't there trying to, establish a protocol like Stephen Greer so that the lights appear and then you start engaging with them and all that BS. I was doing the magic of Abraham Melling. I decided one night to do this offering, which I positioned at the center of the room. The place where this whole the ritual took place is also a specific place, was a puppet theater. I explained also,
I thought that, I do remember that in the book.
In the center of Rome, in a very particular area of Rome. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, I have this blue orb arriving, and it was like an experience I didn't expect, because after that blue orb arrived, that previous search for the unknown had manifested, and it manifested in a way that then gave me also a lot of knowledge in the following days that were dictated to me, and that then filled up these 44 pages, which eventually,
well, when you say dictated, like it was just information that you could clearly translate onto paper.
Listen, I'm not listen, one thing, I might be somebody who is an ardent student of philosophy, of history, of this and that, but I've never been a mathematician. My father was gifted with mathematics and geometry. He had a mind on that, he was a genius in that kind of thing. I wasn't that kind of. So for me to actually transcribe all that, it was really like, what the heck is this? It wasn't. It wasn't like something that I,
that you knew. It was just you were the channel.
I was channeling something, and then I understood that this channeling was actually preparing me also. It was like we're establishing a protocol of contact to explain who they were and what was their intentions, and especially preparing me as a remote viewer. And I didn't know what remote viewing was. What I did know and this is something which I touched briefly on in the book Invisible Master, was that of out of body experiences that somehow I had my father talking with his colleague, another doctor, one day. We went, my father used to go on these passeggiatas, these walks, because we used to live in the countryside. When some friends come and visit him, academics, and, mostly academics or
Yeah.
students of his or whatever, or patients or former patients, because he was no longer practicing psychoanalysis, but still maybe they visit him occasionally. He would like to go on a walk. And during this walk, I remember, you go along like a child, you're 10 years of age,
Yeah.
whatever, and you hear your parent talking with this friend and saying, yes, the Monroe Institute, the out of body experience. My father was very interested. This friend of my father apparently had made some experiences based on that book that had been published in Italy in 1974, the book that then became the product of the Gateway process, basically, which was then, used by the remote viewers, because people like Hal Puthoff and then sent their own remote viewers to the Monroe Institute to train them in out of body experience. But when I heard about out of body experience, I was like very interested in this subject, and a synchronicity happened that I was 10 years of age, and when you're 10 in Italy, you do a little exam, the elementary school exam, at the end of the year. And usually the parents, they give you the possibility when they have to maybe have a gift. What do you want? It's almost like Christmas. After you do an exam, if you are successful, they tell you can, buy, I don't know, a bicycle, or buy this or buy that. Purchase something. I wanted a book which I have seen in the back of a comic strip of sorts. And that book was actually I didn't know what, it was Il potere della magia bianca, which translated in English will mean the power of white magic. I absolutely didn't know what this book was about, if not that it was about magic, and the subject of magic somehow fascinated me at the time. In
Hmm.
in uh, in the English language, the same book was published with the title "The Magic Power of Witchcraft." So, but
Hmm.
because of Italy, and the fact that Italy in the 70s
Yeah,
is
you
still
wouldn't be.
really
Yeah.
Catholic, it wouldn't be so suitable. Plus, they were actually promoting it on a comic for children. So, I mean, it was now.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about this book. The book authors were Gavin Frost and Yvonne Frost, who were apparently two Wicca practitioners. And it was published in the first time in the English language in 1976. And then it was published, like I said, at the end of the 70s in Italy. But within this book, aside from the classic Vika stuff, that, by the way, we know that Gardner achieved a lot of this knowledge through Aleister Crowley. So, I mean, the Book of Shadows and everything that it implies. But
Yeah.
within this book, the specific book, there was also a whole section dedicated to a technique of out of body to facilitate the out of body experience.
Hmm.
I didn't really know why they included, I mean, in the book, the power of whatever, of white magic, of witchcraft that is known in the English language. Suddenly, what was the reason? I don't know, because it was
It
like
was.
you read the book and it was like almost finding something that doesn't fit in the rest of the context, because, Bika is about the spirits in nature, how to make certain, it's a kind of like almost,
Mhm.
let's say, basic forms of magic that, were modernized by
Hmm.
Gardner, and then, of course, the birth of Bika and all that. But this out of body experience technique I connected it with what my father was discussing with his friend, and I was like, Shh, "Wow, I have a, I have it in my book. I want to experience this. I want." And I tell you, I went night after night in my in between sleep, between waking up, and because you have to have your body at sleep, but not your mind, and so it's a very complex matter. And for me, I could never really put it together because either I would be pulled out of bed to go to school by my mother when I was just about to start my experience, or I just fall asleep.
Yeah.
I couldn't really work it out. Eventually, I will have that experience, out of body experience. But the most incredible out of body experience I had actually after encountering that blue orb. It was like the blue orb I encounter in front of me, it passes, it gets closer and closer. I get terrorized by this.
Yeah. You said that.
And then at one point, when I couldn't do anything about it, I simply gave myself up to this whole thing. I said, okay, whatever, whatever is going to happen
Yeah.
is going to happen. I can't really resist. But one thing that I can add to this experience was that then it coincided with slipping out of my body and having a total out of body experience, and losing then, though, few hours that I don't
Okay.
know what happened within those few hours. I just know that once I woke up, I was conscious, aware after this
Yeah.
encounter. I started to download and channel that information. But at the same time, before that happened, I noticed that the offering I made was no longer in the center of the room and was nowhere to be found in the place.
Mm.
That, I tell you, that was also shocking, as much as encountering the blue orb. Because, first of all, you encounter a blue orb which is actually communicating. It's a form of non human intelligence, not simply, it was
Yeah.
described as some kind of, uh, coming from a mothership, but it was actually engaging in the
Yeah.
way. So,
I mean, in a way that yeah, most of us, well, we just don't have that understanding, right?
but
Um,
the fact that then I downloaded these 44 pages
yeah.
and they were filled up with a lot of information that I had nothing. I mean, you mentioned Egypt. I will
Well,
mention.
yeah.
Then you have Sirius. Then you have the Nomo. You
Yeah, you
have
mentioned the Nomo. I was going to mention that. Yeah.
there is a lot of stuff that didn't really make sense to me initially, but then when it made sense, it started to make a lot more sense, and then more
Yeah.
sense and more sense. In the sense, it was like an experience that grew upon me because,
Yeah.
but I couldn't really share with anybody. So who were the ones I could share this experience with? It became apparent to me that, obvious to me, that if I share my experience with the outside world, I will be derided. I will be, laughed at. So what I
By
do
some.
is I immediately though picked up, because I was just a former Air Force member who had
Yeah.
worked at the Ministry of Defense, contacted a friend of mine in the military intelligence and gave him these papers to analyze, and they just were fascinated by it just as much as me. So I left. I made a deal with them that they will keep these papers for a couple of weeks, no longer. They could photocopy them if they
Yeah.
wanted,
Yeah.
and then bring them back to me, which they did.
Yeah. That's good.
So from that moment onwards, though, I moved on with my life. I did all my
Yeah.
various experiences. Every now and then, I might have, a specific person who I might cite my experience to, but very, very rarely I will actually fully engage in explaining, like I said in my book. Only when I eventually had the opportunity to encounter people who were prepared at a certain level,
Yeah.
I will then, and it happened with me also in Russia, out of all places that I relate part of my experience. And I actually had people on the other side understanding it and taking it seriously. But when I started 20 years ago, this whole, you know, revealing of my past experiences within the secret societies and everything within it, and
Yeah.
then manifested in what became Confessions of an Illuminati, first as a website, then as a series of books and all that. I always thought that this would be better left to after people understand that I'm genuine about what I'm doing. I'm genuine
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
what I'm doing. And then once they have understood that I'm genuine about what I'm doing, then I can maybe tell them also one of my inspirations for what I'm doing. Because if I
Yeah.
started from that point, you know, if imagine this, imagine in 2006, it was actually a period of time in which ufology was not living one of the most best periods.
Hmm.
Ufology 20 years ago was actually living one of the most difficult moments because there was no big revelation. Everything that had been put forward had been, of course, derided. And you know, it was
Yeah.
the system was built in a way that was
Yeah.
shielding
They
truth.
didn't want it. They didn't want it out there.
So, you know, for me coming out on the internet and saying, yes, I am a former member of these secret societies and I have dealt with non-human intelligence, they would have said, okay, this guy is insane. I mean, they already said that. I already had to fight for years. First couple of years, not only I was fighting trolls on one side, and then I was fighting
Yeah.
the intelligence in Norway that came there to my house, threatened me, and then
Yeah.
eventually ended up arresting me for espionage. So it's not like I was living an easy life, but I
Yeah.
definitely didn't want to make it worse by then saying there is this non-human intelligence element in my work, which I want to address. It simply will have made things probably more difficult at the beginning.
No, yeah, I understand. And I think that the way that you've done it is really well done because, you know, you have a personal experience, a close encounter of the third kind. You know, you're talking about the Vatican, and the Vatican archive is like basically to me, I think they've documented, like you said, they translated. You talked about that too. Sorry, with the Blessed Virgin Mary and how this lady or woman, and how there's a connection too. You talk about this to these crafts per se, right? And of course, if you've been raised up in a Catholic environment, you haven't been taught anything else. How on earth are you going to describe like one of these pieces of technology outside of the framework and language that you know? You can't.
Mm.
So like, you know, you won't be able to, right? So you're like Alexander the Great. I think you mentioned, did you mention him? I think maybe it was you or someone else, but I don't know. Apparently he'd seen some of these what I'm going to
Yeah,
call
yeah, 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 yeah,
falakas.
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you use language to me as a puzzle. It's like, you know, it's a puzzle. And then of course if you go all the way back to the Tower of Babel where the languages were confused. But 10 people can see the same thing with 10 different cultures, different languages that they know, and they're going to describe it 10 different ways, right? Even though you literally saw the same thing, right? But I find that the way that you do it, I think the world is.
I mean, like I explained in Invisible Master, I mean, I was always driven by an infinite curiosity. I continued
Yeah,
my
yeah,
study
I
of
share that.
alchemy,
Um,
my initial studies of magic. I
yeah,
was not, I repeat, somebody who thought for even a moment I will engage with some form of non-human intelligence, which will then relate to me a reality which I actually found familiar because then, like I explained in my in this book, I explain how this contact was presenting itself like some form of military squadron that was operating
yeah,
the Vatican, and that is also an interesting element because
yeah, it
it
is.
changed my whole view. Yes, it's true. They call it Legion, and so
Okay,
Legion, okay, it's you know when it comes down to Satan, but we
scriptures,
also
yeah,
know that the Legion of Satan might be rather not really respectable of the rules of engagement that you have in a traditional military, as you know, they are demons, so
Yeah.
nobody expects
Yeah.
anything. But
Yeah.
instead, in these beings, I saw highly respectful, disciplined force that was there, transmitting me details in a very
Yeah.
methodical fashion, and that
It's
left me. And then the fact that some of those things that they related to me manifested
hmm,
because as you know, at the end I also say that those 44 pages unfortunately disappeared, and we also know who might have been one of the main people responsible for that. But my experience, the communication of certain things, especially when it came down to knowledge of things that will happen in the decades following my encounter, well, it was pretty impressive the way that things, punctually manifested,
mhm.
and it was like, wow. It was ulterior confirmation, that I wasn't
Yeah.
simply somebody who was having some kind of far out experience, and
No,
then
yeah, and honestly, with me, Leo, I couldn't care less what other people really think. As long, like, see, with you, to me, it's totally acceptable to me. You're within the realm, like, of a very logical and reasonable person. It's just you explore topics that a lot of people just aren't willing to touch, right? So, I mean, like and to dismiss to me the things that you're talking about, it to me is willful ignorance. So and maybe you're not interested. Okay, fine, you're not interested, but don't dismiss it as being like quackery or whatever. See, this is the problem I have with people, right? Because anything that it's outside of the realm of the bubble they've established for themselves. See, you can say, okay, well, I'm not interested, but don't start with the ad hominem attacks and all this stuff because you don't know this topic.
I
That's
mean,
the problem I have with people.
yeah, and there is a series of synchronicities also, that you have that sometimes happen and occur when you are treating this kind of subjects, which
Sure, yeah.
initially kind of surprised me, but then it became evident that those synchronicities are part of the phenomena,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, I mean,
Like, for example, when I discuss magenta, and then I find out that the guy who organizes the first conference of UFOs in the Vatican is called Alfredo Magenta, and has nothing to do with Magenta the place, but it's actually Magenta the surname. And I'm like, this is an interesting synchronicity. Why don't you let me point out the synchronicity to the actual people from Chifas and Kuhn? And they themselves were like, Roberto Vinotti was like, yeah, well, that is
that's kind of
interesting,
yeah.
actually. But then I found out another thing recently that I didn't even include in the book. That, for example, the guy, that Dr. Antonio Caravaglia, who is the Italia's foremost forensic consultant who conducted the professional test on the documents of Pinotti, these 18 secret documents from the fascist era that were given to Pinotti and who
Hmm.
confirmed their validity. Well, do you know that there is actually a square in Vergiate dedicated to a guy called Antonio Garavaglia, who is not the same guy, but was the local doctor?
I don't know these
And
things, yeah,
I mean,
but
no, no, but I mean, and he has a square dedicated
okay,
to him in Vergiate, out of all places, where they brought the UFO.
yeah,
And it's like he has the
well,
same name of the guy who conducted the series of chemical tests on the paper and the ink of the various documents. It's quite indicative,
mhm.
the synchronicity here, because you have
Yeah,
the name of a place linked to the guy who creates the first UFO conference in the Valley. You have the name of the place, the name of the forensic doctor connected to the local doctor from Vergiate. It's a lot of synchronicities, and then I also explain why magenta was a particular place connected to a specific color and all that. There is a lot of interesting elements that are at work
yeah,
uh, when you investigate these topics.
yeah, and I'm thankful that you've done that, and unless there's anything else you really want to highlight, I think It's been a great conversation, and I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge. But like I said, for me,
Thank
like I would encourage people to, like if you're going to study Leo's work, I mean, this is his life's work. He puts a lot of effort into it. It's study material, right? Like, cause yeah, I read through the book, but I mean, like, I know with retention, some people have more retention than others. But it's just, I do recommend that anyone interested in the topic, yeah, spend some time studying and going it over a few times, right? And then you start connecting the dots yourself.
I think that for the people who are viewing these days this whole ongoing soft disclosure and who don't want to be led astray by the disinformation, by the manipulation games which are behind the scenes being conducted, this book will be rather refreshing because
Yeah,
it will bring them it's almost like having a bird's eye on what is going on and understanding who is piloting all this. When we simply observe this thing passively, put on Fox News and suddenly see Luis Elizondo talking with, I don't know, Sean Hannity, or, and then but why is this guy there? What is he doing? Or what is
yeah,
this other guy doing, Stephen Greer, talking with all this certainty about this phenomena? And what is his
yeah, that's
real
right.
role? And who is piloting these people behind the scenes? Well, I think that that is really where my book touches on this kind of thing in a way that other books have not. I
Yeah,
I have really have I really have a problem with understanding why people fall for all this disinformation which surrounds this topic. They go on the typical Gaia channel or all
oh
that,
yeah.
and they fall for the most. Uh,
Well, my comment on that, Leo, is because they haven't developed their mind the way that you have. Okay, so you understand, see, you clearly understand the difference between, I would say, a belief system, like a theory, and also what you can factually prove. Like you're very good at that, right? I mean,
mm.
you get understand those differences. That's the way I see you. And like even myself, like I know when I transition over to a belief system or the theoretical or the abstract theoretical from what you can mathematically prove and like as a matter of a statement of fact or like I think that's the problem because you get an individual that gets maybe some quite a few followers or whatever and they're just propagating a certain narrative or whatever that may be because people love accusing the government but you're doing the same thing but like just on an individual basis, right? But I find with you it's well done. You're not telling people like what to believe per se. You're just presenting information and like in a way, in an academic way, so that you can analyze that and
Well,
draw
but
your own
because I
conclusion.
tell you what, I mean, this is a good thing that we can maybe, just explain before we end the
Yeah,
interview.
yeah, yeah. It's
Uh,
up to you. Yeah.
when I started to talk about my involvement with the New World Order, the Illuminati between 2006 and 2009, which ended up 2008, which ended up with me being accused of espionage and having to flee Norway. I realized that the attention span that people on the internet have, and on top of that, the level of censorship. I mean, already my first website was being hacked left, right, and center, and it took
Yeah.
me like 6 years to even recover the name leozagami.com after it was stolen by somebody.
Hmm.
We had to trick him into selling it to a friend of mine. Otherwise, I would have probably
Good for
asked me
you.
for I don't know how much money. But this is really the fact that pushed me to write books rather than simply being a blogger or a
Yeah.
divulgator or a searcher here on the internet. I mean, I respect what you do. I respect what I do myself when I have my own show on the YouTube or other platforms. But it becomes then a matter of credibility
Yeah.
because until I publish those books in a book format, and people were finally able to have the book in their hands with all the references, the sources, and everything. Until that moment, they didn't give me the time of the day credibility wise. I was just a simple an internet curiosity. And
Yep.
that what pushed me in 2008, 2009, when I saw what was happening, to go to Japan with my present wife and to then publish, thanks to the Japanese, they gave me the opportunity to publish my first books. My first six books were actually published in Japanese. Then after I started to see if I could publish them in Italian, but the Vatican was absolutely obsessed with stopping my publication in the Italian language. They
Isn't that
even offered me
interesting?
money. I talked about it in my confession series about it. They offered me money. They offered me a
That
position.
says it all, doesn't it? Right?
So I mean, they didn't want this to be divergent eternal. So when I said there is synchronicities, and like I
Yeah.
said Giade, but it was Magenta, the place where the guy you have Piazza Antonio Garavaglio, then you have Magenta also as the surname of this guy Alfredo Magenta, who is a guy who then does the synchronicity of events that eventually started with that contact experience with the blue orb,
Hmm.
exchanging, having this information,
Yeah.
being able to then become part of those Illuminati, because I became for a period part of this whole network, which then led me to the
Yeah.
possibility of confirming the existence of another reality. And that now I can finally, coming here in America, be free to write things that in Italy I couldn't write. In Europe, I
Yeah.
would be arrested. I would be
Would they
simply
arrest you in Italy? Like, would they actually?
in
Yeah.
Italy, up
Yeah.
until 2029, I can no longer go in neither
So,
Italy or any country of the Schengen area, which unfortunately includes also places that are not even European Union, like Switzerland or Norway, because if you write something in Italy, they
yeah.
keep those fascist laws. I mean, they claim they are a republic. They changed
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah. Yeah.
1946 and all that. But in reality, their constitution retained those fascist laws that were used to fight the journalists and the truth seekers of the time. And so they will immediately arrest me if I go
Okay.
anywhere in Europe, at least until 2029, where we hope these accusations and these cases against me will go into prescription.
Okay.
We
Well,
hope.
yeah. Hopefully that's. I mean, you're trying to help. I mean, the way I see it, that's why I like you because I like people.
One of the main things that made me realize that the administration, the current administration of Donald J. Trump, is not a genuine and honest administration, was when I, who used to be the president of Italians for Trump, who basically
Yeah.
helped
You.
along with popularizing his name in the Italian American community and so on.
Yeah.
He didn't help me out with the with the basic thing. I asked his new ambassador, who is now touring Italy on his yacht,
Okay.
who is this rich billionaire from Texas. I asked him if he could help me out, getting me the possibility to return in Italy and visit my old mother before she dies, and that never happened. They never even replied to my formal letter that was written. They suggested me to
Okay.
write a letter to the ambassador, and I did it in a formal way, in a proper way, and there was
Yeah.
not even ever even a reply. They could
You
have.
think he got it? Like, do you think he got it?
Of course, he got it. I
Yeah.
made sure that he got it. It was a letter. It was formally sent in a way that I could track it,
Okay.
but
Okay.
there
No,
was
that's
no
fair.
reply.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't like that. Yeah, I know, I know. I watched you. I remember like when you were, yeah, hardcore Trump supporter and all that. I know that's
Well,
changed.
I'm no longer, because I
I know.
understand
Yeah,
that he's not
I know.
he's not doing the interest of the American people or of any people. He's doing the interest of those people who go to Mar-a-Lago, his friends, and
Yeah, yeah,
the people that help him becoming more rich. I, I had another impression of him initially, and that really was very disappointing for me. Now he wants to, he wants to sell himself as the guy who is doing the UFO disclosure before anybody else. But
yeah.
I warn everybody that believes in that kind of, trickery that there is a reason why he's doing that. And he's never going to disclose anything that will
Of
jeopardize Lockheed
course.
Martin or the military
Yeah,
industrial
that's
complex,
right.
the defense
Yeah.
contractors in premise, like Peter Thiel, Palantir. Those people who are using UFO technology, who are using the reverse engineering technology results of this reverse engineering, they will never be,
Of course, yeah, it's all underground, man. Like and like actually, I was just talking to a friend, and she was just telling me how her dad would swear on her life, that they've seen these crafts actually come out from the ocean, and I've heard many stories of these things, but for some reason that came to my mind, right? But yeah, I have a
But
very
the
open mind.
ocean goes hand in hand with what the Nomo told me, so it
Yes.
works out, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I have an open mind. I don't have any issue with these with people with their account. Not every one of them, not every person is right with what they actually saw, but there are some that are completely undeniable, and these things are out there. They're there. There's a whole underwater realm. I'm aware of that, and underground. Like let alone the interdimensional. Like these things are real. Like I can
Well,
say
and,
that.
and, and, and when I came in 2019 here in America and I went to Country in the Desert, and then my publisher said,
Yeah.
well, we have organized a secret conference for you in Joshua Tree. We have rented a whole place. So they didn't want to make it like an official thing at Country in the Desert, but instead they made it almost like a secret gathering that happened on the side of Contact.
Oh, really?
So I could present my Invisible Master book, which, ooh, at that point
Yeah.
then became well received, but it was not like I was embraced by the UFO movement. And now I understand also why. They were way too scared that I will discover who was really pulling the strings. And eventually it is always all roads lead to Rome, and this book demonstrates it. So thank you so much for having me on. And God bless your viewers, and we will make sure that this interview gets to the wider audience possible.
Yeah, no, thanks, Leo. Yeah, you take care. God bless you too, man. Thanks for your
Thank
time.